It's the ego that distorts what love is, that distorts what trust is, turns it into a weapon to serve its own end, and then always gets super bummed out when it doesn't work because it's trying to use something that's not meant to be used that way. And of course, I want to say these things super gently because I understand the depth of pain that comes with that inevitable disaster. It feels very real and very raw to the point where it's almost offensive to even say that it's the ego. I find it an interesting inquiry to sit here and look at the camera pretending I'm looking at you, and then genuinely wondering, how are you doing? And I find that to be such a beautiful question when it's somewhat piercing. I'm like, how are you really doing? Because in a way, it's like, I know how easy it is to get caught up in our lives and quickly respond with, oh, I'm doing fine. As if maybe it's not okay to not be doing fine. And sure, maybe we are fine, but maybe there's also things that we are wrestling with on the inside. Maybe there are little stings here and there rolling around. And naturally, it's such a beautiful reflection in the way that I'm clearly talking to myself. I've noticed this over the past 24 hours where I don't know if on edge is the right word, but there was a little something there on edge. Maybe quick to be disturbed if something didn't look exactly how I was hoping it would look. And then to ask myself the question, what's going on? Not looking outwardly, but to take a pause and check in with myself. And what I noticed was a hurt. It's like, oh, I'm hurting. And to see on the surface all of the stories that wanted to blame circumstance so quickly. I could blame my computer for being slow. But comically, it's not really that. There's something else going on underneath the surface. And it's wild how easy it is to busy ourselves or distract ourselves or say it's because of something else, when really, at least in my experience, there is so obviously this little boy that's hurt. This touch of sadness. And what I love so much to see is how incredibly okay that is. It's interesting because when we fear those things, when we fear not being totally okay, so we pretend to be okay, when we assume that we shouldn't ever feel hurt, it's so easy to push those things down. And yet in the open landscape of life, this present moment, it's amazing how truly allowed it is. And it doesn't have to be an indicator that something is going horribly wrong. But in this instance, to recognize that, oh, that's actually there. That's okay. And then speaking to that little one on the inside saying, what's going on? This, of course, presents an opportunity to hold space for very real aspects of the human experience. And what I can see in that aspect, and these things, my goodness, quite playfully challenging to put words to them. But I can see this little boy that's carrying around some stories, wondering if everything is really okay. What about this and what about that? And whatever that painful emotion might be, I see that that little boy is just scared. And even in all of these stories that might be somewhat projected outwardly, looking at circumstance, they all point back to this fear. And the mantra, of course, for this fear: I'm afraid I'm not enough. Part of me wants to say, I wonder if it's the same for you. But more accurately and more directly, I wonder if you see that it's the same for you. And I say it that way because of my playful degree of confidence that behind all emotional disturbances is a fear. And behind all fear is a fear of not being enough. Of course, could be expressed in other ways, but this fear of losing love, losing what we hold on to that somehow tells us who we are, that tells us we are enough. And then, of course, in the vastness of the unknown tomorrow, my goodness, it makes sense why we might be scared about being enough tomorrow. There's so many unknown variables. You know what I recognize in this space? Very beautifully and sweetly, is that this landscape that we will call spirituality, in all of its bells and whistles, in all of its stories, and in all of its mysticism, there's such a profound simplicity of presence that is simply unafraid of anything that enters this space. And I see that this little boy inside of me is in some way seeking that space. It's almost like the little boy is seeking to be held. Like this little boy somewhere deep down knows that it's okay, but is having a hard time seeing it. And naturally, this just brings up the visual of the little boy running into the arms of mother. That loving space, that presence that knows I'm okay. And that illustration is simply one aspect of the fractal that is life itself, the mother of all creation. And at least for me, on this journey of life, being human, spirituality, that space becomes more and more self-evident and true and real. It's unfailing. It is never not there. It is so much only a question of, am I willing to enter into it? And if we're going to look at these illustrations and paint a picture of it, you can see it's kind of like the child or the little boy who gets his feelings hurt, gets scared, but he wants to pretend to be all tough. He doesn't want to appear weak. And in the intensity of pretending, he becomes a little aggressive, defensive, really trying to hold up a facade that he's got it all together. But deep down, he wishes that he could let himself be held by love. And understandably, in the vast landscape of being human, it seems as though we have encountered many experiences that tell us it's not safe, that we need to go on pretending, that we cannot step outside of that facade. We cannot allow ourselves to be so vulnerable, to let down our guard and surrender into whatever is the most authentic. Isn't that interesting? To surrender into whatever is the most authentic? Because that is such a threatening space. However, in one aspect, it's only threatening to the facade. And what I see in this landscape of spirituality is that this space of love, this space of divinity, in its ever-present presence, it's always available. And I see the times that I might complain that it's not there, are the times that I am the one that's unwilling to truly go there. Which is also to say, I'm holding on to too much. You see this to really enter into that space, to enter into what is real and true. You have to release what is false. And so often we cry out for that space, but we are simply unwilling to release what is false. It reminds me of the classic phrase, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And we all know that person, and sometimes it's ourselves that say we'd rather be right. And so we are rested in our self-righteousness, but something inside feels poisoned. And really what we're holding on to is a self-image. It's not so much we want to be right, we want to be perceived as right, which is to say, we don't want to see ourselves as wrong. There's been so many examples of that in my life, whether that's holding on to a resentment, withholding love, all because the image of myself was being threatened to the point where I might not be perceived how I want to be perceived. And do you see this holding on to an image? This image is the unreal. This image is the falsehood because it's not really who you are. It's like the little boy who won't surrender to what is authentic because he sees it as too embarrassing to be seen as out of control or unstable or whatever. And in this human play, sure, it's nice to feel safe. And that certainly has its place. But what I also see is that it's futile. It's not sustainable. And I also see that it's not the true safety that I crave. It's like a synthetic form. You know what it's like? Being famous, or a bunch of people saying that they love you. It can be nice for a little while, but then at some point it just becomes empty. It doesn't really touch the core or the truth of what you are. And then there's maybe a more authentic or real version that hits closer to home and genuinely feels supportive. In all of that, I think is still pointing to something deeper. Whether it's a million people who say they love you, that can be a little empty. And then it's your friends that say they love you, a little bit less empty. Your family, your partner. But I assume you've had the experience where at some point, even that doesn't get you there. There's still something deeper. It's kind of like trust. And the concept of trust is one that I find a little bit hilarious. Not to say it should be or shouldn't be, but from what I see as human beings, we say to others that I will trust you if you do what I think you should do. I will trust you if the way that you move doesn't expose my insecurities. I will trust you if you don't do anything that scares me, if you don't threaten what I'm holding on to in the future. It seems rather conditional and reminiscent of I will love you if. And this is not uncommon, that we assume love is conditional and transactional. But what I find interesting in that is to say, I will love you if, is to say, I don't love you right now. I will love you in some imagined future moment when things look how I want them to look. So I am using the concept of love as an instrument of control, which isn't love at all. And trust, of course, can be used as the same. But again, playfully, humans. Naturally, the deeper trust and the deeper love says, I love you because I see what you are. The love isn't looking for anything in return. And how wild that can be such a foreign concept to human beings. And maybe we get a taste of this in those silent moments with somebody that you truly feel like you love. That moment you look at them and you just say, my God, I love you. And sure, it's not long before the ego jumps in there and says, because of this and this and this and this and this. But really, this love just sees wholeness. My goodness, there's so many ways to illustrate this. But the same goes with trust. The way that I play with it is that I trust you to be you. I trust that you will unfold in whatever way you need to unfold. And I trust that I will see whatever it is that I'm supposed to see, which can and will only contribute to my wild adventure of consciousness expanding, which quite regularly includes encountering things I'd rather not encounter. You see this, the way that we trust life? It's not life, I trust you to give me what I want. It's life, I trust you, regardless if it looks like I get what I want. See, the trust isn't about me. The trust is that life knows what it's doing, even though I don't understand. And the more you see the nature of what is true, trust, in theory, becomes easier. And what's interesting, and it's funny how this all ties into love or trust or compassion, whatever you're talking about, whatever flavor of truth it is, it's all the same thing. But it speaks to how we give this truth within us to things in the world, which is like saying loving things in the world or trusting things in the world, only to watch it all collapse in some way. And of course, this speaks to the consistent stream of disappointments. Because when you truly trust in life, which is the same as trusting in what's true, there cannot be disappointment. Because of course, the disappointment would say that I don't trust. But so often we are trusting in things of the world or other people, but that always comes with an expectation of how they should be. People are going to be people. But if you kind of tilt this concept of trust and trust people to be people, you won't be disappointed. You know what makes this so difficult? And my goodness, I talk about this all the time. But it is this ego character, because it's always trying to get something out of it. It's the ego that distorts what love is, that distorts what trust is, turns it into a weapon to serve its own end. and then always gets super bummed out when it doesn't work, because it's trying to use something that's not meant to be used that way. And of course, I want to say these things super gently because I understand the depth of pain that comes with that inevitable disaster. It feels very real and very raw, to the point where it's almost offensive to even say that it's the ego. But if we're going to get to the truth of the matter, we have to use some flavor of words that help us see what's actually going on. If we're going to see the truth of what's really going on, we have to allow ourselves to be with what is real, which is to meet our authenticity, which is to meet what's really going on inside of us, and not be so quick to just label it with another story that projects itself on the world, but to get intimate with what's real. And I understand the terror in that. But at some point, we're going to see there's nowhere else to go. If you want to see what is true, you have to go into what is real. The beauty, which is true every time, is that something that scares us so much, that something that is behind the emotional disturbance, which is a fear, this fear is an innocent misunderstanding, which is to say, there is a way of seeing things, which is the way you are seeing yourself, that is not accurate. You're not seeing the truth. This is why the truth is not afraid of your fear. This is why the truth is not afraid of your self-condemnation, your guilt, your everything that hurts, because it knows it's an innocent misunderstanding, and it knows what's really there. This is the gift we are all given, the truth of life, which is the remedy to everything that hurts and everything that we're afraid of. So, take a breath. Be still and truly meet yourself. Thanks for hanging out with me today.